All right. Hello, everybody. We are here for Palantir Weekly. This is number 55, I think. It is Saturday, March 4th, 2023. We are in March. We've got a lot to talk about. Palantir learning modules that basically came out, allowing anyone to get kind of skilled in Foundry. This debate we're having with Foxglove to see if we can get the NHS contract, and the potential to get NHS contract itself, and all the politics that are going on with it. If you have any questions throughout the live stream, put them in the chat, and we will do our best to try to answer them during the podcast. But first, we know that because it's Palantir Weekly, it's we got to celebrate on a Saturday night. Welcome to the show.
No
I'm just glad we can't see Chris's face cringing.
Yeah, this time.
Because he's not on camera this time.
Chris muted the whole thing. Chris is incapable to show his camera because he's too pretty, so the phone camera would spaz out if he showed it. So
that's what I heard.
That's why he's not doing it. Okay, yeah, let's start with Palantir Learning. Learning.palantir.com. CodeStrap was pushing this over the weekend. I think he might have even helped them launch this entire program thing. What were your first thoughts, Matt? Let's start off with you when you saw this, and kind of what do you think it will do for the broader Palantir community to have access to Foundry and things of that nature?
So I have to dance around this question a little bit. So first and foremost, I'm excited about it. Secondly, I'm probably going to use that feature if it's rolled out on our ecosystem, which most likely is, on Monday, because we've actually been talking about that pretty heavily with kind of like the alert system and stuff like that. Previously, the way we've done alerts in the past changed, and then it went to a different system, and now it looks like it's been integrated into this system. So it seems pretty cool. So I'm excited for that to kind of get rolled out. So I'll be watching that video come Monday morning if that's available to us. But for me, that's something like, for example, just being point blank, someone that uses the program, we were talking about having to hire or bring on an entire additional person, or at least 50% of the time. And if I'm able to kind of lay out all the appropriate alerts, sit with somebody for like a couple hours to be able to understand what alerts we want to have on some of these wells that we have. And I work in a non-operated business, so we don't have as many eyes as we would for like an operated facility. And so that being said, we're a little bit more short-staffed comparatively because we're not the ones that are doing all the big decisions and making the operation decisions all the time. But we still need eyes and ears to keep track of things. So we were talking about, we need to bring on an entire new person. And if it's like, well, if I am able to just watch this for 15, 20 minutes, understand how to use it, and then sit with all the other engineers on my team, it completely eliminates the need for an entire individual to join our team, because I'm capable of reading alerts. I'm capable of forwarding on things to people, sending them to the right, person's eyes, or alerting our partners to say, hey, something's going on at the facility. Are you guys aware? And if they say yes, then obviously it's not a big deal. But yeah, it's pretty pertinent to me, some of these things that are being rolled out. So anyway, that's as much detail as I'll be willing to give with that question.
Okay, Chris, your thoughts on Palantir.learning?
I already started using it. Can't say exactly how far I've gotten into it. Yeah, it's great. I think a lot of the stuff, like from a very surface level, is things that we already know. But as I get deeper and deeper into it, I'm starting to see how businesses really do, how businesses can basically benefit from having a system like this that basically integrates a lot of separate softwares that they currently have. So if you look at it from an organizational standpoint, every organization has different, subsystems that every different department uses, things that are highly specialized to their specific niche that they're trying to pretty much adjust for and utilize to run the operation. And then they all have like the single people that report up the value chain, and then a decision is made, and then they go back to using their segregated systems. Well, Palantir Foundry can actually take all of that and bring it to like the main decision makers. So you don't necessarily have all this like siloed data where each person is sitting on like a small fief of information. And yeah, I mean, businesses willing to pay up can radically change their entire operation to be a lot more connected. I do have a concern as to how much integration is required in order to get it to work. Because from what I'm seeing, it requires a lot more manipulation than Palantir is really leading on. It's not just a drop in the kind of like software where you just drop it into the system and then everyone's going to be utilizing it right away. I think there's a key differentiator in that implementation will take longer than what is being led on, but the stickiness factor is going to be like tenfold. Where once Palantir gets in and your business starts utilizing it, especially like some of the core features of it, it's going to become like a natural part of your business where you won't be able to live without it. And after that, Palantir is just going to be able to charge an arm and a leg, and you'll just have to pay it because it's so deeply rooted into your organization. So I think that's probably actually one of the reasons why a lot of companies may not necessarily go with it right away. And that, do they want to commit to a such a large change? Because I think any company that ends up getting Palantir Foundry, from what I'm seeing, it's going to be a culture shock from what people have utilized traditionally, right? So I think the fact that their customer numbers are growing is actually a really good thing, because I think all of that stuff will eventually materialize into revenue in the future. I just think that it's going to be a much slower pace than what a lot of people are expecting. So I stand by what I said before, that I don't necessarily think that this company has the ability to have just a giant S curve where everyone is going to be signing up for it, and and then we're going to see like huge revenues in a very short period of time, like the Tesla thing. But I do think that they're going to have a nice long sustained path to revenue that's profitable, and eventually they'll be able to probably go up significantly in terms of share price. So the other thing is they also started to do some good cost rationalizations also. So they didn't necessarily need to, but they started doing some minor layoffs, which I think impacted about 2% of their company. I think that's just how the valley is doing right now. Everyone in Silicon Valley is laying off staff that are non-productive, non-essential. And what I mean by that is not that they don't necessarily are unproductive. It's just that the role that they were originally hired for may not necessarily be something that the company needs right now. So I know, like, from my understanding, a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, they started laying people off, but it's not engineers and people that do the physical work that they laid off. It's mostly like people in the almost like the bureaucracies that support the entire organization. Like, do you really need
Yeah, the
this
supporting
many?
functions. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, do you really need this many people in HR? Do you really need diversity and equity and inclusion anymore? Especially because those are like non-revenue generators. So it's like, oh, maybe I don't need an entire team dedicated to figuring out how I can hire more Black people, or how I can hire more, like Indian people or Asian people. Maybe I can just hire one or two people, because if I'm doing layoffs and I'm cutting back on staff, like, I'm not necessarily trying to hire more. So I think a lot of companies are doing cost rationalization, which is actually really important, because in order for any company to grow long term, you have to do it in a profitable way. So I think Palantir is just following along into what the other technology companies are doing, and just, figuring out, okay, where is the fat that we have, and we can trim some of it. Luckily, Palantir doesn't have that much fat, so hopefully that just translates into more bottom line revenue. I mean, bottom line growth, and that profitability ends up translating into more dollars from Wall Street jumping in.
Yeah, I did want to chime in. I do agree. It's not like a Microsoft Excel, so I agree 100% with what you're saying, Chris. It's like you can't just say here's the suite of Foundry, and you need somebody to kind of set up a lot of the back end integration of where's your data coming from, and what specifically are you looking for, what exactly do you want to track. It's not as simple as Microsoft being like, here's our Microsoft Office suite, like here you go at it, right? It's not anything like that, and it is uncomfortable, and I think it will be a pinch point, I think, for a lot of companies until they realize the value. I think like Forestry and a lot of these other, or Forrester and a lot of these other companies have come out and displayed how many millions of dollars they've been able to save. And I think people, until they see their industry included in something like that, they'll be hesitant because one, it's costly. Two, it requires basically, I don't want to say handing over the wheels to Palantir, but it's definitely something where it's not like, okay, we'll give it a go, and 2 years later, if we don't like it, we'll just stop. It's like once you're kind of on the train, exactly what you said, Chris, it's you're on it, right? And it requires a lot of data, or sorry, it requires your culture to change the way that they view data, because you're dealing with data scientists, right? Like, I'm a petroleum engineer by background. I'm not like a computer scientist, right? So that I had to kind of sit there and view things from their perspective. They had to sit there and view things from my perspective, multiple interviews. And that could be a pain in the butt, right? Like, to be able to do and try to embed into a culture. And like I said, many a times, there was a few times where I was like, this isn't going to work. Why are we doing this? This is stupid. And then eventually it clicked, and I was like, all right, this shit works. It's fucking great. Like, um, to the point where, I mean, my company is very often at these foundry cons, right? Like the CodeStrap was fortunate enough to meet some of the people that I work with. Like, and they're not. It's not something that they are like, hey, Palantir's going to pay you to go. It's like, no, like they invited our people, and we were like, yeah, we're more than happy to go, right? Like, it's a culture, right? Like, it's a different way to view how data is used, but it is extremely intensive in the first part of it, and then it really kind of comes on maintenance mode. Very much like you see, it's like you get the acquire, then you kind of grow into the business a little bit, and then you kind of have this like normal sustained sort of. And yes, there's different parts of the business you can kind of grow into, but it's interesting. And thinking about what you said there, Chris, about like how difficult it will be to grow over with revenue. I was talking, I think my buddy Cole's in the audience tonight. I was talking to him over the weekend. I was like, well, the longer I hold these shares, the more confident I am that this company will be extremely profitable. The thing that I struggle with is exactly what you said, Chris, which is I don't think that there's some massive S curve coming anymore. And I think it was either you, Amit, or it was you, Chris, who said it's probably going to be more like a Salesforce over time, where you have this
No, Chris.
consistent.
No,
That
Chris.
was Chris, hot Chris. Yeah, hot Chris was like, you're going to have this consistent growth. And I'm just like, I think, like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, you're right. I don't think there's going to be some big realization that, thousands of companies are going to be like, you know what? Because the data and the proof is already in the pudding. Like, we've seen it in FoundryCon. We've seen companies come out consistently, adding more and more to their backlog of, yes, we're signing on for another 3 years, 4 years, and the curve isn't accelerating anymore. In fact, it's kind of just staying rather consistent, right? So it went from 50% growth, and as it's grown, now we're down to lucky if we're going to get 15 to 20% growth this year, and then but that's going to be probably something that we're going to hit 10% growth, 15% growth every single year, just because people are going to start getting used to it. Um, but it's really interesting. It's like my mind about how quickly this thing can grow has kind of shrunk, but the knowledge of it being profitable, I think, is continuing to grow. My fear is, though, is like, is it something where I thought would take to the end of the decade to be this 150 $200 billion company? Now I'm looking more like 2035 to get there, because it's going to have to be a long, steady grind. But that's not really a problem for me per se. But anyway, Chris, all that to say, I agree wholly with a lot of what you said.
I mean, there are scenarios where that could possibly change, but a lot of that depends on what kind of products that they come out with that are outside of their foundry business that could allow other companies to capitalize. Because it's just fundamentally the software itself that's the key, right? Which is foundry is just something that's going to be slower to scale than maybe another product. Because if you one of the things that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about is that when you start a business and you're doing something in that business, there are always these eureka moments where you have things that develop on top of the core product that you were originally envisioning to be your market leader. So, as an example, like Amazon. Amazon had originally started as a bookstore. Everyone knows that. And then they moved on to, selling things on the internet. But then they had AWS, which was an epiphany for them because guess what? There was just something that they did not think. Like I don't think in the year 1990, what is it, 9 or 96, whatever, Jeff Bezos started Amazon. He thought, yeah, I'm going to sell a great product using cloud computing, and that's going to be my main revenue driver and money driver for the next 20 years. No one thought that, but it ended up being one of their major things, right? So I think Palantir, depending on how they approach the market, they could theoretically have those eureka moments. Now, they've had moments like that they've honestly missed, which is not a good thing, right? So, as an example, the data warehousing market, like I think Coach Strap might have mentioned it before, they've been doing data warehousing way longer than a lot of people know. And so it's a lot of times it's just opportunity and how to capitalize on your own business like in certain things. So as an example, if you try to make cupcakes, and while you're making cupcakes you discover that, hey, I can make really good ice cream because I don't know, I have a recipe that in while trying to make cupcakes I made really good ice cream. Well, you should also be able to, like, oh, maybe I'll do like an ice cream and cupcake store and see how that goes, right? So it's any business that you have where your original idea can be the core product that you have. But if you have other ideas that come along halfway through and they end up becoming the real revenue drivers, that you should be able to, throw some money behind them and make them really great things and then sell them. I mean, you look at Palantir, and the other thing is like Anduril, right? Anduril came out of a lot of people that used to work at Palantir. So I keep seeing a lot of these entrepreneurs that have Palantir background. And my only thing is, how come they didn't stay at Palantir and, utilize their know-how to build a product that then Palantir was able to capitalize on? I mean, maybe it's a culture thing. Maybe it's like, hey, come to us, get trained, and then go out into the world and change the world. There have been companies like that. PayPal was like that, right? Where PayPal originally, the PayPal mafia, that whole thing. Maybe we're looking at the next generation, which is the Palantir mafia. So,
Chris, I want to get your thoughts while we're here before we get into the debate stuff on Snowflake earnings. I know you sold out of the stock, but what were your thoughts on whatever they announced?
Yeah, I mean, to anyone who actually has been paying attention to a lot of the cloud segment, and 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 Snowflake is just basically right now majority, and like not majority, almost entirely in the cloud. Um, a lot of companies are cutting back on spending on things that they don't necessarily need, and the business model that Snowflake has is based on consumption, right, where you don't have these fixed term contracts that are going to like ride you through bad times. If customers need to cut back on compute, they're going to cut back, and the minute that they
It's
cut
true,
back.
because I was talking to someone the other day that said they only pay $20 a month for their Snowflake account. So it really is like an AWS type of pricing model.
Yeah, which is good because it means that a lot of people can adopt it very easily, but that also means that people can cut back very easily also. So the canary in the coal mine was just Amazon Web Services. If you looked at Amazon's earnings, they came a lot lower in terms of growth than what a lot of people were projecting. And I'm not saying that, Snowflake and AWS are apples to apples in terms of, growth and stuff. But what you can see is once you start seeing one consumption model driven company starting to kind of like cut back, or at least the services being cut back, then it's not a hard thing to imagine that that's going to happen with other industry players. So that's why when it was in the 170s, I was like, yeah, I don't necessarily. Once the valuation was up there again, I was like, all right, I need to trim back, and I sold out of my Snowflake position, which was good because now I accumulated again once it was back to like the 130s, and I'm already up again in my position for Snowflake. Snowflake has bounced off of 130s for a while. I think the valuation makes sense, at 130. The company's very well run, still executing, still growing.
How
It's
would you
just
feel about stock-based comp being 70% of revenue?
um not the biggest fan of it, to be honest with you, because it's just a large part of it. But there was an interview that Frank Slootman did with JCal on the what is that thing called, on one of the podcasts.
This week in startups, yes.
And while other companies are really cutting back on their headcounts, Snowflake is actually growing their headcount, mainly because they are going for this next level of adoption in building on applications on top of Snowflake. So they actually have a lot more in terms of investing for the future. While other companies are in the valley are starting to cut back, Snowflake is still adding meaningfully to their company because they need to kind of like expand out that offering. They're still in growth mode. I think a lot of people are assuming that growth is dead, but no, the companies like Snowflake are still very early in their growth cycle, and there's still a lot of need for staffing from them. The
Is there
one
any analysis one could make when comparing everything that's happening in the cloud sector? Obviously, guidance was down for Palantir aggressively, just like guidance was down for Snowflake aggressively. Could you make the argument as a Palantir bull that the excessive stock-based compensation is highly related to the fact that they need sales and marketing to grow the company, which is why they're incentivizing these employees with stock? And I mean, eventually they're just going to have to do more acquisitions. Otherwise, you'd be investing the $2 billion share buyback that they're also doing into product. And because they're not investing into product, which means they're not going to organically grow, they're likely going to acqui-hire, and they're spending 70% of rev on SBC. Do you think that somewhat legitimizes Karp's argument about these companies being PowerPoints and they're actually building something that, even if we don't see the financial upside for the next 5 years, that it is something that has a true moat that's different?
I don't necessarily think so. I think each company has certain things that are its strengths and its weaknesses. I think one of the key strengths of Snowflake is that they have really good leadership that understands the market and what they need to do in order to grow in it. One of the things I really liked when I was watching the interview, which was it was around company culture, where there's a lot of companies that when they hire, it's almost like they hire and then they just keep these employees around, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. And the culture at Snowflake's not like that. They are built for efficiency, and they're going to keep that way. So I think there was someone that asked, like, oh, layoffs, like other companies are laying off, are you, Frank Slootman, are you going to lay off? And the whole thing was, no, we don't lay off like 100 or 200 or 1,000 people at a time. If you're not productive, we just lay you off. Like, we're just going to terminate you. That's how companies should be run, where you're always trimming fat. Like, if you're not meeting expectations, you should be gone. So a lot of these other companies, they've had to do this. It's weird because technically, even from a bottom line perspective, they didn't need to do layoffs. Like, Google is still profitable. Meta is still profitable. Amazon is still profitable. Like, they're still generating tons of revenue, right? Was there really technically, from a business end, a need to lay off? Probably not from a purely financial standpoint, but they let a lot of rot happen into their companies over the last 2 years. And they realize that now they've got a bunch of pretty much an activists in their companies that are derailing things,
So
right?
I agree with you from the business perspective, but I mean, it's hard to deny that whatever Karp was saying about these traditional software companies, at least from their earnings, is kind of coming true. That they don't know what to do with the money, right? Karp has said many times they don't know what to do with their stock, even though we can all agree it's pretty richly valued. Stock-based compensation very high. They're not investing in actual executing way better because Snowflake is a mass market product. But it's just interesting. You see their earnings, and it's incredibly interesting to see that that they really don't actually have a product that's important enough to last for the next decade.
I must have missed most of what you just said. I don't know. You're going back in and off, in and out.
Yeah, it was, but I can't say that though. I mean, you think of how large these companies are. It's like Warren Buffett, right? I mean, it's like uh, Warren Buffett's not going to go out there and make a $2 billion acquisition because it's not going to move the dial for Berkshire Hathaway. And it's the same thing with Google at this point, and Amazon, and Apple. It doesn't make sense for them to build unless it's something like Beats or something like that, where they think they can build it into a $20 billion a year business, it doesn't make sense for these companies to spend 1 billion, 2 billion, right? They're looking for the next elephant. And I don't think, I listened a lot to, um, Gary Vee a little bit and stuff of the like. And I think he's got some good thought processes. I mean, like, who would have ever thought that Amazon would have acquired Whole Foods? And here you are. Now it's just like second nature, right? It's like you have to think, at what point is Google or Apple going to be able to say, hey, we can fit that into our ecosystem and it's going to work because we have the AI technology or the technology as a whole to make it simpler, which is going to drive up costs, or sorry, drive down costs and make it more efficient, right? Like, think about how Amazon is really trying to destroy, I guess, the bottom line workers that are at the front line, being the cashiers. You can just walk your card out and it is 100% accurate. That's hundreds of workers that you can eliminate from a store and increase margin substantially. And so if you think about the same for other businesses, where is that? Real estate? Is it in banking? Like, there's so much. And I was talking about this with a friend the other day. It's just like there's so many people with all their hands in the pocket. Everyone gets a piece of the pie. If you get a piece of steel from Mexico to come to the United States so you can drill oil wells, there's probably 3 to 4 different companies that has to go through, and each of them needs to make a profit margin in order for that piece of steel to continue. So when you start thinking about things in that sort of realm, there's so many different ways that you can cut costs and make entire companies which have already been established, but that means that you can acquire in complete levels of businesses, or in complete, I guess, different places that you can cut out all this margin and add it to your bottom line. Now it goes to say, like, at the same time, Carp can't sit there and, I guess, sit in an ivory tower. I mean, I love Carp and I believe what he's doing, but he's also sitting on $2.6 billion in cash himself, and he's not really out there making these massive investments into the business himself, right? I mean, I know he's trying to stack cash during this sort of time, but I mean, for a company his size, wouldn't you think that sitting on 500 million to $1 billion worth of cash would be enough? Why 2.6 billion? Why isn't he deploying it, right? So at the same time, he can sit there and point the finger, but he's not doing that himself. So just a little bit of food for thought in that realm. And to touch a little bit, another thing, when we were discussing specifically the layoffs, and I'll turn it back to you guys. You have to think these companies grew headcount. I think what it was Google specifically from 2021 to 2022 grew headcount at the end of the year from 151,000 people to 185,000 people. That's a 20% increase in headcount, right? For 1 year, you lay off, say, 5-10% of the organization, right? Considering the entirety of from 2010 until 2021, 2022, they were growing at double-digit growth per annum in terms of headcount. Like, everyone loses their mind when it goes the opposite direction for 1 year, but here they have grown. And same thing with Amazon, same thing with all these other organizations, grown 50, 60, 70% in headcount over the past 5-6 years. And we take a little bit of a foot off the accelerator. We say, okay, maybe we were expecting the trajectory to start continuing until 2024, 2025. Let's take a little bit of a break, and everyone loses their effing minds. Like, you have to think about it from a business perspective. It's like, okay, the growth rate has slowed down a little bit. Obviously, they're not giving out money for free anymore. So you can't just go to the bank every time you want to build a new warehouse. That actually costs money to do so. And you need to take a little bit of a step back, coupled with, you have to think, like, if you get the opportunity to do it and a recession is coming, even if it's not, like, financially necessary for you to do, it's an opportunity for you to eliminate bloat in your organization that could continue to rot, like Chris was saying. Like, imagine if you just say, we're never having layoffs. And it's like, well, people will, I don't want to say take advantage of the company, but people will be like, I don't need to spend this extra 2 hours today doing this. I'm just going to go home early, right? It just kind of, at the same time, like I see both sides, right? Nobody should ever lose their job. I feel that piece of it. That means you have to go home to your family and say, hey, honey, I lost my job. Where's our next bill? And where are we going to pay our bills from, and how are we going to feed our kids? That's awful to think. But you also have to think how many people have been employed over the past 5 to 10 years from these massive growing technology conglomerates that otherwise wouldn't, right? So it's like, yes, I recognize it's a trade-off, right? You have so many hundreds of thousands of people that have been continued to be employed, and you take a little bit of a step back, and it's all hell kind of breaks loose. So you have to see both sides of the coin. And in a recessionary time like this, unfortunately, you just kind of have to take advantage of it when you have the chance.
Yeah, and also I think a lot of companies are scaling back on these moonshot projects that they had to do because they, wanted to stay on the, innovative path. So as an example, if you look at like Amazon spent so much money on products that never really made it to market, or they made it to market but they weren't popular, so they got cut off, which is exactly what you should be doing, right? Same thing with Google. Google did the same thing. Meta did the same thing. There's a lot of products that you have to try out. One of the keys that you have with innovation is that you're going to spend money on projects that fail, and you never know which one is going to end up being that 10x or that 100x or product. So I think right now, a lot of companies are just saying, look, the cost of capital is getting higher, right? The chances of any of these projects that we've tried to really, push, they're not working so much. Let's cut back on that product. Let's cut back on the staff. Let's cut back on capex, and reorganize the company so that we're built for the next 10 years, where we're not trying to scrounge around for money to grow ourselves, right? So you look at Amazon paused construction on their second headquarters in Virginia, right? Microsoft and Google, I think, scaled back on some of their plans and Meta for their data center expansions. So those kinds of things, I think, will end up showing up in the next couple of years, which is really actually which is a good thing. Like, I think we should all be looking at the FANG names that have high cash flow businesses that are still growing their bottom line, right? And now that they're cutting back on OPEX and CAPEX, that just means that there's way more money that's going to be allocated towards their stock buybacks, because that's essentially what's, going to keep their employees happy. Because the last thing you want is employees to, one, be in this constant fear of being laid off, but then also their stock-based compensation go down by half. I mean, it's a pretty real thing out there right now. So I think a lot of companies are right now going to be taking a lot of advantage of the decline in their share prices and buy up where they can. A good example of that is Salesforce. Benioff is notorious for this philosophy of Ohana culture, where basically everyone is family and all this other stuff. And Salesforce was just not growing the way that they usually were, and they had a lot of overhiring that happened. And once Benioff started cutting people off, the business is starting to rationalize again. And you're seeing that end up playing out, because you saw the radical jump in Salesforce, right? I think a very similar thing is going to happen to a lot of great companies over the next couple of years, where a lot of these layoffs and capex reductions are going to show up on their bottom lines, and it's going to end up supporting huge buyback programs that will help buoy them in 2023 and possibly help them get back to their all-time highs in 2024. But that's
But
going to be left to be seen.
But my question to that is, though, Chris, like I get that, and I think it's an opportune time to maybe cut some things that maybe have been. When I mean cut some things, I mean other bets that are kind of sinking money. It might be a good opportunity to cut some of them, but like some of the stuff that they were cutting at Amazon, I thought was like I think they cut like the robotics part of the business, and I forget, maybe it might have been like the AI part of the business a little bit too. Like so things like that where I'm like, have you really given it the full time it needs to incubate and really get to a place where it needs? And I recognize that it might be a wise and pertinent decision for the short term in 2023, 24, 25. But you have to think like the the thing about business which is very interesting, is a lot of times we think about things on a quarter to quarter basis, but in reality, the biggest thing about business is that it's infinite. Is, you think about these businesses and they have to transition through so many different oceans and seas. The tide changes, consumer wants change, and so with that, it's like you can't just say, hey, we have search, we have YouTube, those are going to be our key businesses leading us into 2040. You have to kind of understand, yes, those are our mature businesses, they're continuing to grow, they're our growth engines. What are our other things that we're going to continue to use that will transition us into the next part of the 2030s and 2040s? That is it neurological sort of stuff? Is it genetics? Is it, what truly are we going to become in the next 20, 30 years? Because you think about what Apple did. Apple transitioned from, a personal computer to laptops to basically an MP3 player to now being kind of like a music system, an application owner, to wireless headsets, to phones. They've continued to transfer, and you know that could be something. For example, they could be cutting that thing that could turn into the next iPhone at Amazon and Google. They just haven't given it enough time to go yet. So while I think it's pertinent to say, hey, you've been at it for 10 years, it hasn't really showed any signs of life, like maybe let's cut it. But if you're talking about something that is still in its infancy, 3-4 years in, it bothers me a little bit, right? The business isn't always going to be Google search, right? People aren't always going to be using google.com. It'll transition into something eventually. Just like people don't use MySpace anymore, just like how people are starting to phase out using Facebook and they're going to Instagram and other avenues like WhatsApp and stuff like that to utilize Meta products. So I don't know. It's like a touch and go sort of thing, right? Like buybacks are great for the short term, but all it does is boost EPS. I'm a firm believer that if you know what to invest in, which is obviously the hard part, I'd much rather invest in the business and get my increase in EPS that way. But I think a lot of these companies are so big at this point and they throw off so much cash. It's just so difficult to do. And maybe that's a little bit about what Amit was talking about with Carp.
Good discussion, and I guess we're going to see kind of where it plays out from there. I want to transition to this debate. So we are having an official debate. When I got this news, I thought it was really interesting to me. March 15th at some conference in the UK, we've got the head of Palantir UK, Lewis Mosley, versus the head of Foxglove, Corey Kreider. And literally they're going to be doing a public debate on, I guess, the ethical use cases or the value of data privacy. And I mean, the entire point is, should institutions within the NHS use, or in the UK, like the NHS, use Palantir? And what does that mean? Now, Foxglove, for those that don't know, is funded by George Soros. It is a nonprofit organization, kind of does a lot of media stuff that spreads different forms of propaganda and things that they want to put out into the world, because that's why, they have their unique perspective. They're very anti-Palantir. Corey is anti-Palantir. And so it'll be interesting to see Corey, who really thinks is an evil company, versus Lewis, who is head of one of the largest offices Palantir has in the world, in the UK, kind of defending the value of Palantir. So I guess my first question is, let's start with Chris. A, what do you think is going to happen in the debate? And then B, what do you think Palantir has a chance to get this contract?
My question is, why the hell hasn't George Soros been assassinated yet? Like, seriously, like, this dude, if there's one person in this world that deserves a bullet to the back of the head, it's probably George Soros. All right. And the reason why I say that is because this dude is a villain. Like, everyone knows he's a villain. Like, around the world, he is literally responsible for mayhem and chaos around the world because he has this worldview that fits his narrative, and that's it. Like, it doesn't make any sense why he's even welcome in any country, right? He's literally responsible for, like, especially in the UK, almost like crashing their economy at one point. Literally, like, there's so many states and cities in the United States where he backs these people who are basically just, I just don't understand how anyone could support that guy, like, based on what like the kind of stuff that he supports and all the tragedies, the miseries that we all face because of guys like him propagating his radical agenda on the rest of the world. Now, what's interesting is he will actually throw and based on his organization try to have this moral high ground somehow on, oh, the world needs to do this and the world needs to do that, and Palantir is this big bad evil company that does all. Like, I think this debate is gonna be a lot of mudslinging towards Palantir, right? And a lot of black money that's being pretty much shilled out to politicians is just going to end up showing up. And I don't think necessarily the Palantir is going to get the NHS contract, only because there's just too much money that's being put into the pockets of politicians and all these like um groups that are out there, like these non quote unquote nonprofit groups that basically are just there to like be spokespeople for stupidity and cause countries at the country level to make bad decisions, and eventually the citizens end up suffering because everyone knows, look at how great Palantir did for the NHS. And to think that we're even having a debate about the effectiveness of Palantir.
Why do you think a debate is happening? Do you think it's like a
I know
public law or something?
No, it's exactly what Chris is saying, right? It's the Soros of the world, the other billionaires of the world that are against the other billionaires of the world that are trying to manipulate how the world actually works. And Shamath, as much people hate or dislike him or like him, I think said this very brilliantly. And so this isn't an idea of my own; it's a regurgitation of his. There's about 250 people that actually run the world, right? And so when you think about the news that comes out, right, that's billionaire Robert Murdoch. That's all these billionaires that have the ability to manipulate what goes into the streams because they own the social media pages, they own the newspapers. So I'm sure that the evidence is clear that Palantir has done a phenomenal job. One, somebody wrote this in the chat section earlier, and I think they said it very eloquently, is how well Palantir has done with their foundry, unleashing a foundry to allow the vaccines to be rolled out without a hitch and be able to help world health in that perspective. And then continuing on with the NHS and what they're doing. And at no point up until recently, when the NHS deal comes out and it's a $480 million contract, is now Palantir the bad guy. And I'm anticipating that a lot of that comes from UK news sources that are very left wing facing, or just have a certain political agenda that they're trying to get across that can be bought or is owned by billionaires. Just like, for example, when you see Elon, everybody loves Elon, right? Everyone loves Tesla. Everyone loves what SpaceX is doing. But for some reason, all of a sudden, when Elon wants to go and buy Twitter, which is a social media site, whoa, 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 whoa. We don't want this. We don't want this. Why would we want this? Well, guess who's the one that's saying and has it on CNN and Fox News that this is a big deal and a problem? Are the billionaire news networks that are owned by these other billionaires that help spoon feed you things. So if Elon now has the ability to run Twitter, which was primarily a system that was owned by, partly the government, and we've all seen the Twitter files and stuff of the like, then why wouldn't the same thing be going on with what's going on with Palantir and the NHS? And exactly why this debate is happening entirely on its own anyway. So I don't know. That's just my interpretation. Maybe it's very conspiracy theorist of me, but I'm just a firm believer that there's 250, 500 people in this world that have the capability and power and influence that are the ones that truly decide what happens the majority of the time.
I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to a lot of things, but I'm actually taking a back step from that a little bit and saying that there has to be some level of regulation in getting money out of politics, where there has to be a limit on some donations and some of the other stuff that happens in the background. There's just so much, like, who elected these people to make decisions for us, right? Who elected these people to influence the general public on certain topics? It's literally I feel like this is the end of times when it comes to like the Roman Empire. If you guys know that during the Roman Empire, the fall of Rome, one of the things that you saw towards the end was that you had like almost like oligarchs be able to make dictatorial decisions that were even more powerful than the elected senators and eventually the emperors and stuff too. So basically it ends up being that if you have money, you get a say in how the world works, and that's it. And the only time where society becomes like that is like right before the what is that thing called? Right before pretty much the barbarians are at the door, right? I think that's what's eventually going to happen. This bourgeoisie class of people are going to overplay their hand, and then one day everyone's just going to rise up and say, you know what? I'm tired of this bullshit. I'm tired of being fed lies. I'm tired of living a life where from the moment I wake up, I have to go work, work, work. I don't have any opportunity to save for myself and for my kids. And it's time to eat the rich. And that whole cycle is just going to play on itself again. I don't know. I hope that we make the proactive actions to get a lot of these people out of politics somehow or get their influence out of politics.
Eat
You
the
know,
Rich. You've been watching too much of you, or
you know
on
what it
Netflix?
is? I hate to say this, but I am understanding more of the case of Bernie Sanders. Believe it or not, I hated Bernie Sanders for a long time. All right. I just thought the guy was an idiot. He was a kook. Like he had this like idea that no, people should not have all this money for X, Y, and Z because he's just a jealous person. And I don't necessarily think that that's the case anymore. I think it's more around they have too much power and they have too much influence over what happens to society. Like no one should be arbitrarily have the power to influence enough people to go a certain way and that cause society to basically keep them in charge. Like I feel like the body politic should be in charge, not the arbitrary person with a lot of money.
But not all of it's bad though, right, Chris? I mean, I see where you're saying, right? It can be abused. But then you look at certain people like Elon that are truly shepherds of good that said, "You know what? I'm going to spend my last dollar on Tesla and in 2003 I'm going to start SpaceX." And two big pieces that fortunately helped out society very much. I'm not going to say I like Tesla all too much, but I think what he's done to the automotive industry as a whole is unprecedented. And then coupling that with, kickstarting space exploration again when, in 2012, 2013, Obama really shut it down and tried to make it more privatized. It just left room for Elon to kind of come in and take that step forward. I think, it's not always that bad. But I see what you're saying, which is sometimes that influence is being used more for bad than it is for good.
I think it's just keeping power within a certain ideas. So as an example, and this is something that legislatively starting to come up in the US, which I think is important, is you as like let's say you buy this index fund because you Matt are buying index funds, right? You have certain dividend portfolios that you have all this money that's indexing. Now here's the thing: what if your index manager is saying no, we have to do certain things to support an idea or a cause, otherwise we're going to divest from
You don't
that.
want to get me on this topic. I mean, I know they already do.
Yeah. And
I know they already
I
do.
hate that that's how things work. Like I don't know if anyone here in the chat knows, but basically the way that it works is like you give your money to a fund like Vanguard, BlackRock, etc. They have those shares in trust, and now they have the power to influence companies to do certain things, right? Things that you personally as a shareholder technically would not agree with, but because they have it in trust, they're able to make certain changes to certain companies that don't necessarily go along with your values, and I think that's wrong.
I agree. So I think it's pretty funny when you think about it. Sorry if this is going too down the rabbit hole. I can stop at any second. But when you think about it, all these CEOs and people on the board and the executives of the company say the shareholders want. Well, you know who the shareholders are? 5 to 15 to sometimes 20, 40% of the company is really the institutional investors, the Vanguards, the BlackRocks, exactly what you're saying, Chris. And so when they say the shareholders want buybacks, the shareholders want, it's like, well, of course the shareholders want buybacks, because you're not going to have the Vanguards, the State Streets, the BlackRocks of the world selling out of all these companies entirely. And whose shares are they actually buying back? They're buying back the people that are actually exchanging them back and forth with each other, which is the retail investors like you and I. And so what that means is the retail investor like you and I, percentage of every company is shrinking while theirs is continuing to grow. So they have more opportunity to influence the companies even more so. And I find this very interesting because I work for a large oil and gas company, and there's a renewables push, an ESG push within our organizations going on at the moment. And to me, you notice these things, and I'll hopefully turn back to the room and hopefully like raises some eyebrows, where it's like, oh, you know, we have to pull back a little bit on the amount of oil that we're producing and invest more into the renewable space. But at the same time, we also want to have all these buybacks, and we also want to have all these dividends, and we want to have, it's like, well, if you're anything like any of the big companies, right? The Googles and stuff of the world that have the opportunity to invest in these large growth engines, you're going to do it. Now, of course, Google and Apple have now grown to the size where they have so much excess cash flow, they have to do something. That's why they do buybacks. But when you're balancing the books so tightly, like some of these oil and gas companies are, why are you going to strain yourself by giving out 5-6% dividend yields, coupled with all these billions upon billions of dollars of buybacks? Like Chevron just announced a $75 billion buyback. Exxon announced $20 billion. Like everybody's announcing these hundreds of billions of dollars worth of buybacks. When if you think about it, everyone's like, 8 to 10% returns in renewables, that's not enough. Put $1 billion into that shit, and within 18 to 24 months, you're going to be making 80 to 100 million dollars in EBITDA. That's not that bad, right? And then you think you're putting, let's just take $20 billion from several of these super major oil and gas companies. You put $20 billion, you get an 8 to 10% return. You're talking about now 1.6 billion to $2 billion a year in EBITDA in 18 to 24 months. That's an entire company. Entire companies are made off 1.6 billion to $2 billion a year in EBITDA in terms of returns. So if the companies, when you think about it in specific industries, the reason why I bring this up is there's this ESG push, okay? Make these oil and gas companies transition. If they're asking from buybacks from our companies, then they're telling another company to invest wholly every single dollar that they make back into what they truly want. So who are they asking to do that? Is it NextEra? Is it Orsted? Is it any of these other companies that are highly renewables focused, where they're saying, no, we don't want buybacks from you. We want you to actually be the front runners and the market share owners of where we're transitioning to. But for these other more mature companies, we want to leave them in the dust. And we want to make sure that they struggle with all their buybacks and all their dividends. And so it'll give the illusion that we're heading towards a certain direction. The big headline is that we're heading towards some sort of big direction, but we're going to front run and choose, because we own 20 to 30% of all these companies. We're going to front run and choose which company is actually successful. And I think that that's just an example from the oil and gas vision side or the energy side, but I'm sure that happens very much so in a lot of different companies. You go to Wendy's, they have these clear cups now. They didn't used to have that like a year ago. You go to McDonald's, they have the same one.
Bro, that paper straw shit has to die. I'm sorry.
So,
I don't care about the
things.
turtles. I don't care about the turtles, bro. I care about my mouth not having toilet paper with soda. Like that's like that.
The reason why I brought that up in context of Palantir Weekly is that these same funds have the ability to influence underlying companies to utilize and not utilize products, believe it or not. Regardless of how great Palantir is, if they get a phone call from one of their board members saying, sorry, we don't work with the company that targets people with drones, you're not going to be able to get in the door, right? One of the things that probably limits Palantir as a lot is that they're not heavily left leaning. Like, and here's the funny thing that a lot of don't realize. I don't know if you guys know this, but you know that George Soros was invested in Palantir at one point,
yeah,
right?
Yep.
And then once Peter Thiel like supported Donald Trump and all that stuff happened, it like Palantir went from, oh my God, this is great company. Like Palantir used to work with the Clinton Global Initiative. I don't know if people know that, right? But once they started to support Donald Trump, it was like, oh, this evil company, it needs to die. And automatically it was just like,
It
okay.
was like 2016. It completely like snapped.
Yeah, it's like, it's like they went from being the good guys to the bad guys just because they did one thing. Even they had like a mini revolt in their own company when that happened. So this is just how things are. The things are very divisive. I will say one good thing though, Palantir is understanding a lot of this stuff and is actually doing what it needs to in order to change its image from being a lot more moderate, right? Which means that it'll hopefully translate into more business opportunities going.
Having said that, Chris, how do you think Lewis is going to approach this debate? Like, we need him to win the debate, right? Do you think he's going to have a strategy to explain what Palantir does, or do you think Corey's going to walk over him and call him evil?
Okay, so the way that I would approach the debate is every time that they try to throw mud at you, you just throw the good stuff, right? That's your reply. Like if you say Chris is an asshole, I'll be like, oh yeah, but you know what? I gave money to charity. This is what I do, blah, blah, blah. So you're drowning out their stupidity with good stuff that you've done. Because Palantir has like a freaking giant list of all of their accomplishments that have gone towards a safe and secure future for not just the US, but for humanity itself, right? So take all of those things and just use this as a moment where even your naysayers will be like, well, I didn't know Palantir did that. Like, I didn't know Palantir supported like recovery operations for Sandy Hook. I didn't know that they supported COVID initiatives for the UK. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. So turn your bad guys mudslinging into your advantage. That's what Trump always did during the debates. I don't know if you guys remember that, where they would throw something bad at him, right? And he would just turn that shit around and turn
Like how
it
he
into,
doesn't pay taxes. Yeah.
yeah. It's like, yeah, I'm smart for not paying taxes. Who wants to pay taxes?
Trump, regardless of if people didn't like him, he objectively won most of these debates, especially against Clinton.
Hands down. Yeah.
And because like he just made it more exciting, and he just I agree with you, Chris. Like when they throw dirt at him, if you turn it around, it's a better strategy.
Dude, I'm telling you, every time they throw dirt at you, eventually they're gonna run out of dirt because there's not that much that they can do. Oh my God, Palantir supported drone strikes. Yeah, you know what else we did with satellites? We supported drone strikes on Russians trying to invade Ukraine. Blah, blah, blah. That's what's gonna happen.
The Ukraine stuff is interesting because I need him to ask Corey straight up, do you want Russia to invade Ukraine and win? And if she says no, then he's like, so what? How do you think they're competing? How do you think, like these are the things where if he can walk her down that bench and ultimately hit her with the punchline, it might be an exciting win for them.
You know what's good? None of what Corey has to say is going to be anything new.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like literally every piece of mud that could have come Palantir's way has already come their way. So at this point, it's almost like you guys remember 8 Mile, right? Yeah. Where he does that, he does the rap battle, and at the third one, where he's like, he starts with Papa Doc and he just says, I know exactly what you're gonna say about me. You're gonna say I do this, you're gonna say I do that, you're gonna call me blah blah blah, and basically just took all the fucking like oxygen out of the room, and so the other person now has nothing to say. So I just hope it just starts with that and just says, look, Palantir's been involved in a lot of things, some things that people may or may not agree with, but we're based on X, Y, and Z. We've always supported doing good. We've had.
Do you think they're going to have a data argument? Because ultimately, the concern from companies like Foxglove are that the data of the UK citizen will be manipulated and potentially stolen. Like, do you think she'll be able to cleanly articulate the technological reason and I guess the like moral case for why Palantir will definitely do things with data that's corrupt?
I think the key to this debate is going to be not being technical. If the person ends up trying to explain things technically on why they protect data, it's not going to work very well, right? It's almost like you ask me a question and I try to explain myself to you. You're going to lose the room right away. Instead, you need to just throw up the big things, the big ticket items, so that this way you're almost like taking away from what they're asking, right?
So you don't think Corey is going to have an actual technical explanation for why the data will be manipulated? She's just going to blame the overarching narrative of Palantir as an evil company, which will then be the byproduct of that conclusion will be, as a result, they will do bad things with our data.
Yeah, exactly. Like right now, if she throws this at them and then they're like, well, we're IL-7 certified, we work with all the governments, blah, 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 blah. That's not gonna work. Like you cannot do that where you try to explain technically the things that she's gonna try to throw. They're gonna try to throw broad spectrum stuff at you. You just can't let any of it stick. That's the key.
Makes sense. All right, I think that's it for this week. This is exciting. I cannot believe they're literally having a debate. I was speaking to a guy whose father is working for one of the companies that's bidding against Palantir in the UK, and even his dad was like, "I don't think there's any way in hell Palantir doesn't get this deal." So I kind of think Palantir is going to get the deal, but like this debate, maybe it's this one last thing where the NHS officials are like, "How bad is the public perception?" Really?
I think one of the things that the Palantir side needs to say is, hey, we should probably discuss Foxglove's relationship with George Soros more. And George Soros,
You think they would do that? I don't think they would do that.
Remember that guy that almost took down the Bank of England? Yeah, that guy. Remember him? That's the guy. Oh wait, why are you taking money for supporting him? Like literally, that's what you do. If they try to throw mud at you, you throw mud right back at their fucking face. That's what I would do. If they say, "Oh, Palantir, how can you trust them with privacy?" Blah blah. I'd be like, "How can you trust George Soros, who almost bankrupted the UK? Explain how you accept money from a person that literally almost bankrupted this country, and that you're coming here to tell us how we should like you're the arbiters of moral opinion."
Abraham's comment is so good. This debate is dumb. What is this high school award contracts based on competency and data, period? Unfortunately, this is what Chris and Matt were talking about for the past 30 minutes is just the political nature of how things really get done.
But I mean, it's a quick question for you guys, and then I'll leave it at that. It's like when you get, like, you're starting to see all these different health systems start to enter the I guess,
The
client.
consortium.
What's that?
The consortium of companies.
Of all these different companies joining Palantir's laundry list of all these different. It's like, at what point is it going to be like all? How do I say this? At what point is it going to be like, okay, the U.S. health systems use it, the UK health system use it. Why isn't all of Europe, right? And then same thing with like, okay, the national defense of the United States is heavily reliant on Palantir. Ukraine is winning because of Palantir. Why isn't all of NATO?
The Ministry of Defense paid them $91 million 2 months ago.
So it's like, at what point is it like? And then that's what makes me still think that there might be some sort of like miniature S curves, right? Not like massive, but it's like those consistent wins. It's like, okay, now France is on board. Okay, now Spain's on board now, and it's like, are those going to be the wins that we get, year after year after year, that really solidifies the, I guess, staple that Palantir has already begun to be within the Western world? And I guess my other question is like, will they try to venture into South America at all? Which seems, it seems like they've done a little bit of Asia Pacific with Japan and Korea. But I guess my question is will they eventually try to go to South America at all? Is there any sort of venture into Africa?
Rio Tinto.
I guess that's true. I didn't think about Rio Tinto.
Yeah, forgot about that one. Oh.
That's Brazil, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
The debate is March 15th, for those that are asking. I tried to register to get access to it, but I don't think they're going to give me access. They were asking like, what health program are you? And I started lying on everything. I was like, I'm part of this, but like they're going to review everything to give me the link. And I don't think I'm getting this link. So I hope it's live streamed publicly, but I don't think it will, to be honest.
Bro, they need to get the guy from Tyson Foods to fucking debate this person. If they got that guy, bro, Palantir getting that contract and then some. You remember who I'm talking about?
I got the dog.
Some people just know how to like effectively communicate and win the crowd over, right? I hope the person that's debating the Foxglove person is able to do the same thing, because there are just certain people that know how to command a crowd. And that's what you need. You need someone that's going to play up the crowd, play up the Roman Colosseum, you know?
I think you hit it well, Chris. You have to win with emotions. You can't win with technical foundation.
Yeah, it's gonna be
Yeah,
interesting.
if this was purely about technical, Palantir would have won that contract hands down. We never would have even got to this point, right? So it's at this point, it's just about how do you placate the mudslingers to get them off your back. That's it.
And again, as Matt said, if we get the deal, it's $580 million over 5 years. That's, you know, it's not a small penny, and that might lead to France and other countries start to recognize, hey, maybe we should adopt it. I mean, if they decrease backlogs by 28% in 2 hospitals, if they decrease backlogs by 30% across the entire country, I mean, like this is going to be a game changer, and countries are going to have nothing to do other than take it more seriously when it comes to adopting it, especially nationalized healthcare systems. So it's a big deal if we get the deal, and I think we're gonna get it just based on the fact that I don't think the NHS wants to go another 5 years dealing with the same IT companies that can't really get the job done, especially 5 of them. Like, that sounds like a horrible idea. Having 5 companies offer service, like, but I guess this debate will determine it. All right. That's it for us. Thank you all for checking us out this week. Money on YouTube. We got to get him to 11K. So check out Matt Money. He's on YouTube. Chris and I are on Twitter. And yeah, we appreciate you guys. We'll be back next week.
Yeah, throw up some of the likes, man. Maybe Ahmed will get some better internet service one of these days.
Yeah.
I got to call Optimum. They're going to figure it out.
We don't need you to invest in Audio. We need you to invest in Ahmed's internet.
Get some FiOS, bro. Come on. What's up? CEO.
Bro, I would have FiOS, but this part of the New Jersey doesn't have FiOS. It's like we used to have FiOS in my old house, but like it's bad.
Is there any good beaches where you're at in New Jersey? Not good beaches.
No, it's like 2-3 hours down.
Yeah, that's where I bought my place.
You bought a place in Jersey recently?
Yeah, I thought I'd let you guys know that. Anyway, we don't need to talk about me. Sorry.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you guys. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Later, guys.